Hip politics, baby.
Welcome back to the Hip Politics family. Welcome back to a very, very, very special edition of the Hip Politics podcast. You have your host here, your board, Mr. Cameron Calvin Trimble, aka Mr. Cameron Calvin, aka Mr. Hip Politics, aka Mr. 216 to the 202, aka Cam the Connector. And joining me today, he's back. It's been 2 weeks. We've had 2 interviews without him, but my co-pilot, the mayor of Capitol Hill himself, as he's known, Michael McQuarrie, aka the DC Nuke 90. What's up, Mike? How you doing?
How you doing, Cam? How you doing, Congressman?
Good. Hope you're doing well.
We got a special one, everybody. This is big. This is big for the platform. This is big for you, the audience. This is big for all of our listeners, all across the podcast space. We today have James E. Clyburn. James Clyburn is the majority whip, the Democratic majority whip in the House of Representatives. If you're not familiar with that, the majority whip is the third ranking Democrat in the United States House of Representatives. He hails from South Carolina. He's literally probably one of the most influential political leaders in this country, definitely most influential African-American leaders in this country. He's been at the forefront of so many different fights and legislation, bringing the voice to the voiceless. I admired him personally. My former boss worked closely with him. I always, Congressman, you might not realize this, but at the barbecue speech during ALC, you always give a really good closing speech for Congresswoman Johnson. And so just really appreciate that. But we want to welcome to the podcast today, Majority Whip, James Clyburn. How are you doing, Congressman?
I'm doing good. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining us.
Appreciate you.
Yes. I've thrown out that term just quickly, majority whip, and some of our listeners, they see the whip, they don't know, and I think maybe some of them are a little past their civics 101 class, so they may have forgotten. But I understand how important your role is in Congress in getting votes together, and then also just being a voice and a convener. Would you mind just explaining to our people what it means, what is the majority whip's job, and what it is that you do in the House of Representatives?
Well, first of all, thank you guys so much for having me. It's a real pleasure for me to be here with you today. Let me give you just a little, to put it in the proper perspective. As you know, the top person in the House of Representatives is the Speaker of the House. That's now Nancy Pelosi. Now, she's the Speaker of the whole House. When you go down from that, the Republicans got their leader, the Democrats will have their leader. And down from that, the Republicans have a whip and the Democrats got a whip. So you go from speaker to leader to whip. And so I'm number 3. The speaker runs the House. The leader, who is Steny Hoyer, sets the agenda, decides what comes to the floor, when it comes to the floor. The whip's job is to get the votes lined up. When the decision is made that an issue is to be put on the floor, my job is to make sure that we get the 218 votes that's required when all members are present and voting, which requires that I get to know all the members, get to know their idiosyncrasies. I learn as much as I can about their likes, their dislikes, their families, their congressional districts, in order to know how to approach the member. And sometimes you know enough about the legislation coming up to say to a member, I'm not too sure that this is an issue that you ought to vote for. And you tell them why. So that's the job. Get the 218 votes that you need for anything to pass.
So Mr. Clyburn, I've been on the Hill for about 20 years, and I know your job as the whip is like corralling cats. So it's not the easiest thing you can do. Tell me, what was the hardest bill or legislation you had to whip for and in the past, and what's the hardest one you see coming up in the future that you might have to whip for?
I think that the most consequential one, and it was very hard to do because we were breaking ground, the Affordable Care Act that we call Obamacare. A lot of people don't realize, but that concept had been around for more than 100 years. Theodore Roosevelt, when he was president, first proposed universal access to health care. And almost every president since came with some form of health care or another. A lot of people remember Bill Clinton tried it very hard, put his wife in charge of getting it through, and it failed. And a lot of people feel that when he failed to do health care, it's why we lost the House in 1994. I think there were other issues involving that, but that certainly contributed to it. So here comes Barack Obama running for president in 2008. He promised that if he were elected, he would put health care first and foremost. He got elected, he kept his promise. And my job was to corral those cats, that you call them, and get the votes that was needed. That was tough. Yeah. Many people remember it was late on a Sunday evening when that bill finally passed. Right. But it passed. And one of my great friends in that effort was Eddie Bernice Johnson, who happened to be my classmate. Eddie Bernice and I came together, were sworn in 1993 together, and we've known each other since 1972 when we first met at the Democratic Convention down in Miami, Florida. She's been a long time friend, but she helped me a lot on that because her profession is that of a nurse. Right. And she knew those issues. I would go to her often, and I give her a lot of credit for helping me to get to where I needed to be.
Right. Do you see a future, some legislation coming down the pike that you think is going to be hard to get to whip for?
Well, I'm working very hard now on this Justice in Policing Act. We got it past the House. It's over in the Senate, and they know it's going to be very difficult to get anything past the Senate. Right. I'm working now trying to get Tim Scott, who's carrying the Republican bill in the Senate. You got Harris and Cory Booker carrying it on the Democratic side in the Senate. And I'm trying to get them to come up with something that the Senate would allow a vote on. Exactly. Okay. Right now, the House, we don't like what Tim's got. And Tim says he will accept some amendments. I want them to sit down and get those amendments that Tim will accept and do a bill, pass it. It will not be the same as the House bill, and let the House and the Senate go to conference. So that's what I'm working on very hard right now. I don't think it's going to be hard for us. We've already passed the HEROES Act. Our job right now, the House has basically done its work, except for the appropriations bills. We are working on those bills now. Some of these bills are going to be tough. I don't believe they'll be as hard as a conference report on justice and policing, but some of these bills are going to be tough because, you know, a lot of people are emotional about funding these Confederate statutes. They want to stop putting Confederate flags in public places, and they're going to put all kinds of amendments on these bills, and that's going to make them tough, especially when it comes to the defense bill. So there are a lot of tough things to do, but you know what they say about us: when the going gets tough,
tough gets going.
Tough gets going. I'm a tough guy.
Congressman, I want to take it back a little bit because you have a very inspirational story. I've heard pieces of it through your stump speeches, but I've really just dived into your person I've studied over the years. You've been, like you said, as you mentioned, you've been in Congress since 1993, but been in politics in South Carolina long before that. What drove you into the life of politics, and what continues after all these years continues to drive you? Because you have some of the greatest energy. Like I said, so you have some really great speeches. I think you got a little preacher in you. I'm a PK myself, so I can point that out. You got a little preacher, but like
I thought
your
there was some
energy
reason I
is
like you,
pure.
man. We're two of a kind.
Yes. What is it that drove you to get into politics, and what continues to drive you to do so much?
Well, when I was growing up, my father, a minister, had two big rules in our house. The first one was every morning at breakfast, we had to recite a Bible verse. He never told us to read the Bible. He just said that every morning before you pick up the fork, you got to recite a Bible verse, and you can't say the same one twice.
Oh,
And
wow.
then the second rule was every evening before going to bed, we had to share with him and my mother, or him or my mother, we had to share with them a current event. We didn't have TV, but the newspaper was delivered to our house every day. In order to get the current event to share, you had to go read the newspapers. So that's the way I grew up. And I remember the race between Harry Truman and Thomas Dewey. Harry Truman, this guy that no one gave a chance to be president of the United States, a guy without a college education, without any great wealth, running against this great skion from up in New York, Thomas Dewey. And the newspapers were so sure that Dewey was going to win the race, they went on and print the headlines before the votes were counted. But when the votes were counted, Harry Truman had defeated Dewey. And I just couldn't understand that. And I just loved that. And I started studying Harry Truman before I was a teenager. And I've been studying him ever since. And so when I got into school at the time that school integration was coming along, 1954, the Supreme Court decision came down. I was active back then, and I was active in the NAACP Youth Council. And I was only 12 years old when I got elected president of the Youth Council of the NAACP.
12? Oh, you were destined for greatness. 12?
I was 12 years old. It happened about 2 months before my 13th birthday. I'd never say that about, but I was 12 years old. I went to this meeting of the Youth Council, and I think I went to the bathroom or something. When I got back, they told me I was the president. And so I've just been involved ever since. I get to South Carolina State, and lo and behold, the sit-in started. And those kids sat down up in Greensboro, North Carolina on February 1. Then I got with a group of students, 8 of us, and we organized a sit-in in Orangeburg, South Carolina, 2 weeks later. The sit-in did not work because they took all the stools out of the 5 and dime, and so we couldn't sit down. So we went back to the campus, organized over 2,000 students, and marched on downtown. Got locked up. But some good came out of that, because while I was sitting in jail, my wife came there. I didn't know her. She came with a hamburger in her hand to help feed us. And I was so grateful for that hamburger. I married her 18 months later. And so that has been my background, and I've just been in it ever since. I didn't get mad about anything. I didn't wake up one morning saying I'm gonna run for something. I just grew into this whole issue of politics. I love it. I study it every day. It's all about building relationships, being empathetic to people. And notice I say empathetic, not sympathetic, empathetic.
You gotta feel them.
Find ways to put yourself in the place of others, and try to lobby them on that basis, rather than feeling sorry for them, feel along with them.
To that point on empathy and building those relationships, I think something that gets a lot of Americans, gets a lot of people, but I definitely know when I talk to people in our generation and a lot of feedback we get, it feels so much like there is a lack of empathy and sympathy on sometimes, especially things are so polarized now, and when you start seeing so many votes come around, like things that should just I'm glad you explained some of the bills and the amendments and why certain things, when we see a headline that this legislation that everyone should agree on actually doesn't. A bunch of people don't vote for it, but you're explaining through that amendment process
Sure.
and some of that, like why that doesn't work. But can you speak to, because I know things have changed in your years since you've been in Congress, but just speak to how we get back to a place where we're meeting in the middle, where we're meeting in compromise. When you're so great, like you said, you'd have to develop so many relationships and understand so much about various members, new members, the members who've been senior members who've been there. But how do we get the Republicans, Democrats, and the various independents back in? Because I think from the outside looking in, so many people just like, oh, I don't know what's going on. It's you're either on one team or the other, and that's it.
Yeah.
But back when we're outside, we're just Americans. We want common sense legislation to pass. We want we got to work. You got to work every day with people you may or may not like. So could you speak to that?
Well, sure. I think that what we have to really understand that we live in a different world today than when I came along. When I came along, we didn't have the internet. My goodness. You go off to Washington, back in the day, it was almost like, took you a day to get there. Now I get on the plane, I'm in Washington in 1 hour. Sometimes I cast my vote, and I'll never forget, I voted one day and it rushed out, and it was a really controversial vote. Ran to the airport. When I got home, I walked in the door. My wife was at the door to greet me, and she wanted to know, what were you thinking about voting the way you did on that bill? I mean, less than 2 hours later, she was chastising me about the way I voted. So the thing is, we're in a different world today, and one little soundbite can redefine a political campaign. I remember a gubernatorial race being lost over one twisted statement. A guy said to another, there's an old saying, if you quit lying on me, I'll stop telling the truth about you, is what he intended to say. And he twisted around. His polling numbers dropped 10 overnight, and he lost the gubernatorial race. I'll always believe it's because of that. And so we're in a different world now. And so what I try to do is get people to understand. I've created this group. It was really done by Jimmy Harrison, who's now running for the United States Senate. But
and he was a former guest on our podcast. We've had
you had Jamie on?
Oh yeah,
we had Jamie on about a month ago.
Well, I wish I hope you've seen his numbers.
Oh yeah.
Jamie is tied. In the last poll that I saw, he raised over $14 million in this most recent quarter. Nobody ever thought he would do so well.
Right.
But he created this group that he called Clyburn Fellows.
Mm-hmm.
Now, he didn't call it that because he was honoring me or anything.
Mm-hmm.
He's calling it that because he came to me and told me what it's going to do. And I told him I thought it was a good idea. And then he came back and said, well, I need $50,000 to get started. so that's how I became Clyburn Fellows. So he's in the 5th group. And the whole thing is to get young people involved early and get them to understand the process, get them to understand why as you mentioned, one little poison pill in a bill can keep somebody from voting for it. And you don't see that in the headlines. And so what we're trying to do is get people to understand that process so that you can be successful at it. I want to see more young people successful in politics. It's a tough business, but so becoming a doctor is tough. Becoming a lawyer is tough. Becoming a public school teacher. I used to be a public school teacher. I know it's tough. So I don't care what you do, you're going to have some challenges. And so people like yourself to get involved in politics, especially to the level that you guys are involved, it is necessary to get more people like you in this business. And that's what it's going to take. And I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that happens. In a couple of weeks, on August the 8th, I'm going to have a virtual scholarship event. I'm handing out 175 scholarships
Mm.
to high school graduates. Won't be able to do it in person. Each one of them will get at least $1,000 to help them with their books and stuff. Each one of them will get a laptop. Each one of them will get a software package. And I will say to each one of them, I want you to stay abreast of what's going on around you. Be involved. That's what it takes.
Right.
And when you're involved, some of the stuff, and it ain't gonna rub off, but you really can be in a climate that allow you to really succeed at this business.
So, Mr. Clyburn, that leads us down to one of our final questions. What advice would you give to these? CBC is going to expand next year. You're going to have more.
Yeah.
What advice are you going to give to would you give to these new younger members coming into Congress next year? What advice would you give them to tell them when they hit the ground running?
The first thing I say to people, learn your district. Learn the people that you're going to ask to vote for you. I think that the biggest mistake that people make in politics is trying to be understood. That's not your job, is to understand the others. If you learn the people that you're asking to vote for you, and you respond to them, you help them fulfill their dreams and their aspirations, they'll respond positively to you. If you go around trying to change your personality to fit everybody you encounter, you're gonna be so messed up by the close of the day, nobody would ever vote for you. So that's my first bit of advice. Get to know your constituents, find out what you can do to help them fulfill their dreams and aspirations. And when you go out and talk to people, then you say to them, this is what my service in Congress means to you. This is what my service in Congress means to your family. And this is what my service means to your community. And you can do that. You'll be all right. And so I tell young people, that's the thing to do. Get to know your constituents. And when you talk to them, let them know what you can do to help them, their families, and their communities succeed.
All right. Last two quick questions.
Yes, sir.
First, kind of a variation on that. You gave your advice you would give to the members of Congress, but I want to take even a wider step back. And this is a pivotal year in politics, a pivotal year in election, pivotal year in just America and the world. This pandemic, these racial and social justice movements. 2020 is like no other. Like it's a year unlike any other. And as I mentioned before we came on, that the hip hop generation is now, it's not just young people. I mean, my favorite rapper is Jay-Z, and he turned 50 in December, and he's not even the oldest artist. So you've got a multi-generational, now it's not just Black people. There's tons of Latino rappers. You've got, it goes all the way from South Korea and Japan, all across the country. One of the biggest selling rappers is a white guy from Detroit named Eminem. So it's multi-ethnic. There's so many women involved now. The cultural influence of hip hop is so large, but there's still a connective tissue throughout that culture. My question to you, as a person who's almost seen everything in politics, what do you think the hip hop generation and the larger hip hop community can do to really realize their political power?
Well, this is going to shock you. You may not know this, but I grew up playing the clarinet. I started playing the clarinet when I was in the 4th grade. I played in a jazz band. I played the alto saxophone.
Okay.
In a jazz
I
band.
played alto saxophone for 1 year in 5th grade. Then I gave up.
Oh, yeah?
I gave up.
Well, that tells you a little bit about how screwed up I am, because the clarinet is a B-flat instrument. The alto saxophone is an E-flat instrument. And so what was I doing going from E-flat to B-flat and didn't do too good playing the tenor saxophone? I never could understand that, but I'll tell you a little bit about how screwed up I am. But I love music, and I think music is an international way to communicate, and it is a source I don't know, of tranquility. It helps carry a message, and musicians can connect with people the way nobody else can. So a lot of people talk about the sports artists. Sports artists are good, and I like them. I was a baseball player, but I think the communication piece, music communicates better than anything else. And so I would say to people, focus your music on what's going on around you, on what will be a positive influence going forward. Because you mentioned 2020. 2020 is going to be the most consequential election, I think, since 1860. That's when Abraham Lincoln was elected president, and we know what the consequences were of that. I really believe that this election this year will be on that order. And so I would say to musicians, there's a lot going on around us. Focus your music on the future, and the future you would like to have for yourselves, for your children, for your family members, for your community. It's all right to feel good, and everybody wants to feel good.
Mm-hmm.
But everybody wants to do good, and most people want to do better.
I like
that's
that.
the thing I would say.
All right. Well, Congressman Majority Whip Clyburn, we've really enjoyed you. We normally do a variation. We have this segment called Top 5 Dead or Alive, but we're not gonna put you on the spot there, because that's people going to their top 5. I just want. I know you've had some experience, because you had some experience with the hip hop community and
sure.
that you've met throughout your time in politics. If you could let us know maybe one artist that you either admire, really enjoyed working with, or really enjoyed meeting, or maybe even really enjoyed listening to, just one hip hop artist that, or a story or person that you could tell us that you admire or worked with or something like that.
Well, I'm gonna give you a hint. I call my memoirs, which I published back in 2015. I call it Blessed Experiences. Okay. Genuinely Southern, proudly Black. I'm as genuinely Southern as James Brown was.
No, James.
And as proudly Black as James Brown was.
He's the father of all
yeah.
rock, hip hop,
soul.
He's
sample today.
Yeah, his music lives on through hip hop on so many of the biggest.
Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely. I'm a James Brown guy. Say it loud.
I'm Black and I'm proud.
Absolutely.
Clyburn, it's been a pleasure, man, having you on. This is one of my highlights of our podcast, is having you
Thank
on.
You, buddy.
I was in your office to speak to Yebby a couple of days ago, and I peeked my head into your office you got up there on the second floor, and just talked about not too many Black people get to walk down that hall that you get to walk down. We get to get in the Capitol, but they don't know where your office is upstairs. And it was just an honor to see where Yebby's office was, to see where your office was, and to see all the work that you're doing.
I appreciate it. Thank you guys for all the work I know you're going to do between now and October 3rd. That's when early voting starts in most states.
Okay.
And by November 4th, the morning after November 3rd, I want us to have a hip hop day.
We got us.
Thank you. You enjoy it. Let us know if there's anything else you need on our end too.
Yes.
Okay, buddy. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Congressman, so much. You have a wonderful day.
You guys.
Thanks for joining the podcast.
Thank you.